My name is Robert. I am one of the leadership members along with Barry, Julie, and Rob. But my name is Robert, so I know that can be a little confusing. But I love being on this leadership team because we just have the opportunity to collaborate on events such like this each month at the very beginnings of the month. So I work for Providence Medical Group. I work at a little clinic on the corner of 2nd and Brown. We're a walk-in clinic that primarily serves the homeless. But with our clinic and with Providence, we in particular like to share reflections. Providence loves sharing reflections at the beginning of each meeting that we have, and it helps establish kind of setting a relational tone, a common ground, basically, when we start with a reflection. Most of the time, it's mission-inspired. So with Providence, our mission is as expressions of God's healing love witnessed through the ministry of Jesus. Providence's goal is steadfast in serving all, especially the poor and vulnerable. So it seems to me that there's a lot of amazing people in the audience today that are hardworking, dedicated, and hopefully have uplifting perspectives, right? And so perspectives, I want to focus on that word for a second. How we as individuals put things in their proper place. Perspective, according to our own point of view, our own circumstance, our own whatever we've been through, that's how our perspective develops. So my reflection is based on how individual fixation influences our own perspective. Individual fixation influences our perspective. Did you know that fixation can either build common ground or it can continue to fragment it and influence our own perspectives? So I lose perspective all the time. I fall into my own mind trap, and I have to weigh everything. I have to hear everything. I have to see everything. I have to look for the best deal. I have to weigh all of my options. It is flat out dangerous for me to go down the shampoo aisle. There are just so many options down the shampoo aisle. Body wash, there's Old Spice, there's just so many fragrances. I have to smell every single one. And I lose perspective on why I even came to this store. So it is very easy. I don't know about you, but I lose perspective pretty easy. Well, a quick story about the man mentioned in Providence Mission. This man was starting to get a reputation for healing. I mean, he had a few words and he was trying to get across, but his reputation or the people's fixation was on healing, right? Something tangible. So one of the stories as represented from this man was there's a group of 4 individuals who were trying to get their friend, this paralyzed man, to see this guy because of his reputation, right, for healing people. So they carried him. They even saw a crowd right before him. They saw this huge crowd and had no perspective on what the crowd was listening to or what the teacher was even saying. What was he saying? They were just so fixated that they decide to go on a roof. They go up on the rooftop and just start digging this new skylight. It's demo day. They're just ripping this ceiling apart. And they lower this man down to this point of common ground. Common ground where the teacher adds perspective on why he's there. The teacher gently reminds them that there seems to be a fixation on a perfect set of rules and regulations that no one could adhere to. And he does something so radical, and I encourage you to look up what that is, and it's in this book called Luke. So after this radical moment, he completes the fairy tale, and he heals the guy, and all is well. But you see, this crowd that was around now has a new shared perspective. They have common ground. So where does that leave our beautiful crowd this morning? Opportunity to pursue common ground, a shared perspective, understanding that there's no cookie-cutter perfect way to approach this puzzle that we all here gather together. I mean, I lose perspective going down the shampoo aisle. But we have each other. And that's what the coalition is about. One of our church sayings is gather to grow so we be equipped to go. So I want to thank everyone for being here and for listening to my reflections each month. I know it can get a little redundant. It's like, well, what's Robert going to say this time? But thank you so much. And again, we have each other in this moment. So thank you for being here. So I want to first kick off how we normally do with starting with our announcements. So is Kylie from the Health District here to give us an update? Oh, here she comes. Kylie, thank you for being here this morning. And we have one microphone that we are going to share. I hope you use some hand sanitizer. Just kidding, here you go.
Thank you, Robert. Hello, everybody. My big updates this month are related to isolation for our county. This week we moved to a new site for, or it's with the Salvation Army, and they are managing that site, and it's on a Salvation Army facility. So I want to extend a big thank you to the Guardians Foundation, who was managing the site before this. The great thing about this new site is that we have a 12-month contract with them. And so it'll give us some consistency in the county and help support all of the shelter testing and just outreach that we're doing at the health district. Oh, sorry.
How does one make a referral to this isolation space?
Yeah, so all referrals come through Spokane Regional Health District, either the epidemiology department or me. All of the shelters have my number, and so they either give me a call. We get the referrals from our shelter testing, just community referrals, hospital referrals, all things like that. And so we just verify that people verify the test results and that they will be a good fit for the isolation facility. On another end, so we have 2 shelter outbreaks, and numbers are staying pretty consistently low. Not anything like we were seeing a couple months ago, but we're still consistently seeing new cases.
Thank you so much, Kylie, for being here each month and giving us an update. And we will go ahead and ask the representative from the COC to go ahead and come up. Thanks again, Kylie, for each month's report. Thank you, Dale, the man, the myth, the legend himself, making his way up. All right, Dale, thank you so much for making it this morning. And I understand you may have some updates for us from the COC end. And if for those that are new and don't know what the acronyms are, it's Continuum of Care Board.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see such a large turnout. Welcome, Mayor, to the coalition. And from the COC level, we actually, I don't want to take the thunder from Eric and the mayor, but thanks to their leadership, actually, that we got the COC grant, the NOFO is going to be on time to HUD. So. And for the first time since 2013, the COC awards include COLA increases. And realize this is funding that starts next year in August because we renew early. So the youth homeless grant of $2.5 million was stalled by the city, has hired Matt Davis as a consultant until more permanent staff can be hired. The youth homeless system continues to lead the way by using case management on a person-to-person basis. The big goal over the next year this is sort of like my perspective as a lived experience, that's my position on the COC, is promoting the systems, the business leaders, the COC, any entity working on behalf of the homeless. We need to be working together. It's crucial coming out of the pandemic. I keep talking about that. Social healing. We need to figure this out, how to socially heal on many levels. One of the models that is being looked at right now, it's of many models across the nation, is the Houston model. Houston actually decreased homelessness by 54% from 2011 to 2019. And they did this by housing 19,000 people in low-income housing, which is by building more, and by coordinating all delivery of services. You know, and we can do that in Spokane. So, and, you know, need to maybe invest some ARP dollars in low-income housing and get the money out the door. So, yeah, that's my report for the month. So, and there, you know, the COC has subcommittees, singles, families, diversion, that, you know, we welcome people to get involved and just be on a ground level, you know, to give us feedback. Is coordinated assessment working? You know, right now we're really looking at maybe that we're, you know, the acuity of individuals getting through the door are a little bit, you know, too heavily, you know, with substance abuse and mental health, and it's leaving some of the seniors out. So those are some of the things that the COC looks at annually and regularly, just of how we're helping in the threading of who's being served.
Thank you so much, Dale, for taking the time to be here each month with us. And so we'll go ahead and transition into our presenter for this month. Thanks again, Dale. Or presenters. So can we go ahead and have Mayor and Eric join us? Eric may be a new face to everyone, but it definitely want to give kudos. He's definitely jumped in the deep end with the CHHS department and has been doing a great job. He's learned a lot in a short amount of time. So we're going to let him open up. Thank you guys both for being here. I'm going to transition this mic for you guys to share, and then I'll just ask some crosstalk information from the other microphone. So thank you for being here. Eric, I understand you're going to kick us off with kind of giving everyone an update kind of about the CHHS department, what's been going on, reading a lot, but you're the guy now. You are the guy in red, looking good. So thank you so much for being here again, and I'll pass the talking stick over.
Thank you, and I'm certainly not a public speaker, so you'll have to bear with me. I wore a tie for the occasion. So a lot of obviously has been happening for CHHS, as I think you all know. And I guess just like as we talk about, you know, the community and the population, the vulnerable population that we serve, I'd also, you know, ask for a perspective on those staff members that care and are concerned and are working on these, you know, challenges every day. You know, I think sometimes when there's some level of negativity, it's not, you know, I don't want to mask the fact that there's challenges within our system or how we deliver solutions, but I would also ask that we remember that there's some incredibly hardworking and caring staff members that are working on these things, you know, every day, that certainly at times, you know, feel like they're a little bit left alone on an island, you know, as they're, you know, working through these incredibly complex and difficult problems. So I just offer that up as a perspective because, you know, at the end of the day, I think we all, I think, sometimes feel that there's maybe a lack of communication, there's a lack of, you know, understanding or mutual understanding of the problems and how we need to tackle them. And as I think, as you've heard everyone say and will continue to say, we're going to certainly be better together. We're certainly going to be better as we talk about those things. I know in the staff's conversations we've had, certainly the conversations, you know, with the mayor and the cabinet and the council, I think I would much rather be in a great conversation where we're arguing about outcomes because intelligence is being applied and we'll get to a better place. It's the things, honestly, that we're not talking about that I'm most concerned about because then something's going to be missed. So, you know, I welcome the feedback and I welcome the conversation, and certainly, you know, I would always want us to suggest that there's probably someone that cares on the other, you know, end of that conversation. So how do we find that meeting point to have those good, you know, complex discussions together so we can get to a better outcome? For CHHS, you know, we've been down, you know, almost like half the staff. You know, we've got, you know, some good news. We've got director interviews that have been underway. And we've got we had one staff member, you know, on the administrative side start this past week. We have 3 people that have confirmed, you know, to start working on the program side, starting basically mid-November, and then the 3rd week in November. And those will go into critical fills that we've seen across the program. We mentioned Matt Davis, which helped significantly, along with many of you, in getting the YHGP grant and that ongoing campaign to kind of end youth homelessness. And so one of the program positions that we're hiring will be positioned with that, so Matt can help do that leader teach and kind of transition, because he's just working part-time, in support of the overall cause. Home program has been another one that's been a challenge, and certainly in our both kind of real estate market today, with kind of the increases in prices and just the constriction on availability. The home program, it's one of the highest bar programs that HUD has, but certainly one of the tools in the toolbox. And we'd lost some expertise directly there. And so we have Melora Schartz, who retired from the city, I think 3 years ago or so, that's coming back part-time to help, both incrementally part-time, and again, one of these positions that's being hired over these next 2 weeks. We'll be working with her again to be able to get kind of trained and educated. So we're doing a very deliberate path of trying to match, past expertise that we've had in the city, along with new positions as we're filling them. We're also looking at very much more of a categorized type kind of program management and program professional standpoint. So, in other words, instead of just kind of like a relatively singular human services group, we're looking to kind of elevate those senior staff, on the program management side, so they're focused on categories, again, like youth, the home program, the COC, requires, a certain amount of, support ongoing for those 19 programs. And just on the COC piece, the thing I would add to Dale's conversation there is also unique this year, at least over past years, is, we didn't have to necessarily make a choice to not fund programs, or programs falling into a tier 2, which for HUD means, funding potentially won't happen for those projects. And so, and to me, it's a very good outcome to be able to get both some COLAs as well as look at dollars that maybe were underutilized in certain areas and get those into fund 2 new programs, that will be coming on this next year. So I think a good outcome for the COC. And I think the hiring piece is kind of key, because I think that one of the things I've heard in all my one-on-ones, because this has been a massive learning curve for me, and all I would suggest is if you're not hearing something that you seem to make sense, you might need to help educate me, because I just might not know. But I think that there's been a lot of, past concern or question in terms of what the role for the city is, and what I would suggest is the good work is happening out here, and certainly we want to facilitate those great outcomes, and I think we need to be better connected and better listening to that as we go forward. And part of this, I think, in terms of trying to match that expertise to that, I think that as we look at the overall system, we certainly see an opportunity to kind of plug what we see as gaps or challenges at many different levels. And I think the transition housing that is occurring through the Way Out shelter is an example of that. It doesn't fix the whole system, but it certainly helps us address what has been potentially a missing piece in some of that transitional housing that we haven't had in the system before. So it is a vibrant system, certainly, based on weather and emergency events or otherwise, like COVID, that has, stress tested the system. But we are getting, I think, improvements, and we're cautiously optimistic, especially as we talk to our senior staff in CHHS. The people that are there, they're positive, they're committed, they want, change, they want advocacy for these important programs, that we represent for the community. And so we very much appreciate the support and that collaborative dialogue. So I'll kind of end there, and then, happy to ask or answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for giving us that detail. What type of, so as you're going through this, rebuilding, basically, phase with CHHS, what type of on-ground consultation support are you hoping to gain? Is that something that is the CHHS leaning on the COC board for that type of consultation, or what type of influence, I guess, is going to help you guys better understand the gaps that are out there?
Well, I'll start, Mayor, and then happy to hand off to you. So I think this is an example. I mean, I think, the connectedness that we need to all of you that are really kind of at that combination of street level, organization level, the ones that are providing, I think, that necessary outreach. I moved to Spokane in 2015, and I'd be remiss of saying that one of the things that I see as unique about this community from where I came from in California is the level of caring and the level of kind of that kind of nonprofit and just small micro organizations doing good work out in the community. I've frankly never seen it in a place where I've been before, and so I compliment I think everyone that has helps contribute to the community on that. I think that when we look at, I've tried to have a massive amount of one-on-ones, and part of that was to help educate. But the other part I think was, and I think part of this is a victim of COVID, as I think we've seen. I think the communication piece basically just faded, or maybe it wasn't what it needed to be, or it needed to be done a little bit more or different to help compensate, I think, for some of the physical separation that we've had. And so I think just trying to kind of leverage the communication, and certainly I welcome that communication from all of you so that we can get better. And all I would ever ask us to do is to kind of focus on the pragmatic, because there's a lot of work to be done, and we're anxious to help get it done.
Should we start a sign-up sheet, just like one-on-one for Eric? Schedule it out. No, that is important, because in front of you, in front of us, is basically a room of like gap fillers, right? We have kind of larger organizations, and then we have smaller organizations too. And the smaller ones tend to fill those gaps that may be associated with the services and the unrealistic expectations that we encounter, and the progress that we as caseworkers can help the patients that we're individuals that we serve. So yes, this is a great start for that dialogue. And it did start with Tija and Tim and David Lewis with the coalition, and being part of that communication chain is definitely a huge part, because we represent basically all the gap fillers out there. So thank you.
Well, and Robert, if I could add, first I want to thank Eric and the team at the city for coming in and doing the work for the last 3 months to help rebuild CHHS and identify some of the needs there. And obviously one of them was communication. It was communicating between the city and council, between the city and the COC and the CHHS board, and to organizations like Spokane Homeless Coalition. And so we're making an intentional effort to do that. And I want to thank all of you here, because you are the frontline workers on this issue, and we need to do a better job at the city of listening to you. So I know today's intent is for you to hear from us, and I know there are prescribed questions for today, but I would also entertain the opportunity to come here and just listen. Myself and Eric, just to come here and listen to what you're experiencing, what you see the gaps to be, what you see as solutions to. Because if there's one thing I've learned coming into office, right before a health pandemic, and trying to move the needle on this issue, it's that the city cannot do this alone. We need everybody working together, and that includes the nonprofits and even the private sector, to come to the table with solutions and to help fund this issue.
And kind of going down this, so if everyone is aware of the topics we're going over today, we're going to be going over, we just went over the CHHS. We're going to be talking about the system as a whole. We're going to be talking about shelters, and then we just have a couple questions at the end. So as we transition into the segment of system as a whole, this is a good question that came in. When an elected official says they want to prioritize homelessness, right, this holistic term is a pretty broad category. What does that actually mean? What is the process to expect with someone coming into office? And this is, of course, directed at
Sure.
But yes, what does that look like when someone comes into office, and what to expect?
Well, many people have said that the election, the mayoral election in 2019, was a referendum on homelessness. It was definitely one of my priorities, which are also housing, which dovetail together, public safety and economic development. But knowing that we have to come together and work together and come up with better solutions to address homelessness. I've spent more of my time as mayor dealing with this issue than any other issue at City Hall. So what does that mean? One of the first things I knew I needed to do was hire a new neighborhood and Housing and Human Services director. We're now in the process of hiring our second one. But to figure out the work that's done in that division, we actually created a new division. CHHS used to be in another division entirely. There were two divisions doing all of that work. It was a lot of work. They were doing all the homelessness and the housing and the planning, the development, all of that work. It was just too much work in one division. First thing we did was separate that out so that housing and homelessness were their own division. We hired a director. We're hiring a second director in the process right now of doing that. But also knowing that, and I came into office saying this, that the City of Spokane can't do this. We have to rely also on our regional partners. I mean, all of the majority of resources and services are in the City of Spokane, but we serve a region when it comes to homelessness. And we need to get other regional partners to the table. And we were able to do that. It's been talked about for a long time, but we finally have been able to do that. And I think the pandemic kind of forced us to do that, because as soon as COVID hit, we were all working together out at the Emergency Operations Center for months on end, trying to figure out as a region how we were going to respond to COVID. Food security, homelessness, housing, all of those things. And so we were already there. We had already created the framework for that type of being together at the table. And so we continued that regionally with the Spokane Valley, City of Spokane Valley, County, and the city. And we've been meeting, now we meet every other week, but for about half a year, we met every single week on the issue of homelessness, how we can come together to fund and come up with solutions. And that's when we decided, well, we don't have to recreate the wheel here. There is a plan out there for homelessness. It's the COC 5-year plan to end homelessness. What are we doing as electeds to move that plan forward? And that's why we came together and said the decisions we make in our own jurisdictions need to support that plan. And so as we continue this conversation this morning, we can talk about all the updates, the things that we've been able to do to move that plan forward and fill the gaps that have been identified in the system.
Yeah, and with that 5-year plan, if you're unfamiliar with, there's a 5-year plan to end homelessness out there that exists with the COC board, and a lot of the initiatives are aligned with that. With the 5-year plan, how do you like select the topic? Because if you were to talk with someone just generally about homelessness, it's a pretty broad topic, right? I mean, you can find yourself going from circumstance to circumstance to circumstance, being food insecurity, clothing insecurity, mental health circumstances, circumstances associated with substance abuse, housing, employment. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, how do you narrow down what the CHHS is going to focus on during a particular administrative cycle, basically? Like, how do you narrow it down from a holistic concern to just kind of one? How do you pick it? That's a tough one.
Go ahead, Derek. Let's start it.
I will try. I think that the listening piece probably should be underscored again, because I think that in many cases, CHHS is not necessarily staffed, at the street level for street engagement. That's not necessarily the emphasis. That really is largely what this group and others, have represented. And so I think trying to figure out how we align. And so today there's a study session with the council. There's a hosting, that the mayor is going to do, where really what we need to do is we need to find that better way to bring, the different boards and commissions together that we have on this topic. The county has one for their Housing and Human Services group. We certainly have the CHHS board as well as the COC. And I think what's incredible about this in terms of an opportunity is we talk more about the common things and the unified goals than actually we argue or we disagree. but unfortunately, the disagreements sometimes are the things that get the most energy, and whether that be media, or otherwise. And so I think we have to have that way to disagree and to put things on the table that are important, to have those conversations. But I would also submit that if we spend a little bit more time with those different groups and the folks that have access to both funding and prioritization, if we figure out those 60% of things that we're aligned about, I'm telling you, this community can do awesome things. You've all seen it. I mean, we've all seen it just over these past couple of years. And so I think there's some incredible power that we can get through that alignment of those things we agree on, because then we can stop arguing about those and just get to work, right? And that's, I think, our community in Spokane at its best. And then those things that potentially that there are some level of disagreement on it, they go across the spectrum, as I think you all know. But some of them are a little bit, I think they're workable. Not every one of them is a philosophical debate. And those philosophical debates are important, for our community to have. But I think if we can kind of separate those from that 80% of good work that we all know just needs to be driven forward and resourced, then I think we're going to help that 80% get along faster and quicker. So I would submit that that's, I think, one of the benefits of bringing those kind of governance groups together, and I think a little bit more unified action and doing that kind of joint call to action so that we're all focusing on those same things, and then creating a path for the deeper discussions that have to happen for our community. So I'll start there.
Yes, and looking at the system as a whole, right, still in this topic, there are, one of the emphasis is that funding programs, right? Funding, putting RFPs out there for certain organizations to apply for, and they get funding from the city. How does that process work? Can you explain kind of when an RFP is posted, what is the process, what's entailed into selecting the organization that's best suited for that RFP?
Sure, and there's, as best I've been able to discover so far as I've entered this role, the city, helps, facilitate like 60 or 70 different programs across, housing and human services, and I think there's been an education process, I think, for all of us, just in terms of how deep and broad that work is. And so depending on the funding source, of which I think there's like 17 different discrete kind of grant funding sources that are currently, used as part of what we deliver as a city. And I think it's noteworthy because, out of that, kind of $30 to $40 million that flows through the system, almost all of it is traced back to those grant sources. There's only about 400 or 500,000, I think, that is general fund supported, your local tax dollars, so to speak, for the general fund. The rest of that is mobilized through kind of state and federal resources, and they're awesome programs. Each of them, unfortunately, when we think about HUD and some of the other ones, have criteria and they have requirements that you have to go through as you would solicit or look for help. And so that usual mechanism is going to be a request for proposal to go out to the provider system and all of you that are doing this good work to help kind of bring back some creative solutions. And one example I would like to kind of give for that, because I think it's timely now and something that you will see, I think, over this next week or so, as we've moved to a much more kind of year-round type system. We're trying to kind of get out of just trying to fight the winter piece of it every single year and have to kind of wash, rinse, and repeat on that. Certainly there's unique needs in the winter, just as there is in the summer or in other emergency situations. But we also know that this is kind of a system that needs to be supported year-round. So a lot of these past contracts have moved to year-round models versus just something that we're trying to activate for the wintertime. And that's, at least in my humble opinion, an overall system benefit, because then we have, I think, a more sustainable process going forward. Excuse me, that said, we still see, that there's, a little bit of weakness as it relates to, some of our family spaces and women's shelter spaces. And so as we're looking at that, one of the things that we're going to be taking back to all of you will be, okay, what can we do to activate a little bit more on that kind of surge capacity for those categories and others as needed, it to be a little bit maybe improvement over like a hotel voucher type process, which only has some limited, depth or capabilities that you can do. And so we're looking at a number of different models. Houston was mentioned, others that have been mentioned where you potentially, instead of, looking at we have both the larger system model that obviously has been employed. There's also smaller space models where, ultimately you look for organizations that maybe have those 3 or 4 spaces where they can provide, which allows you to have a little bit of a deeper breadth in the community. And very often there's a lot of organizations, as I think you all represent in some way, shape, or form, that might have those smaller capabilities but not have the larger space for potentially 100 people. So we're looking at all those as options. We're also looking at the transportation part of it, because one of the things we've seen is that the providers are doing great for themselves and the shelters they run, but across the system, necessarily potentially trying to get someone from a point of street engagement to some place that's available is still a little bit of a weakness. So we're looking at those things to continue to kind of try to add some capacity, but we're also trying to make sure that we're listening to the community and what you see out there that might be a benefit for us to add.
And when you say we're looking into that, who's the where?
Okay. Well, I guess that's a good call out. So certainly, I think in the CHHS sense, we're mainly that kind of gatekeeper or the one that is trying to be the listening agent, and then package that information to try to present it, back both to the administration and the council in terms of whatever action or budget needs that might represent. Now, interestingly enough, through the funding sources that we have and the grant funding sources we have, there sometimes is funding available. Sometimes, honestly, the bigger challenge is trying to match the right solution to the problem set than it is necessarily the raw dollars that it might take to get there. So both are unique challenges, because certainly there's probably never enough money to solve the problems for our city that maybe we would like to solve. But sometimes it's really just trying to make sure you're finding that right tool or that right solution path for the problem that you need to also take on board.
Yeah. And what then in that process would be your role, Nadine or Mayor Woodard?
Whatever you want to use. I don't have a role in that at all. We have a CHHS panel, typically a board panel, that reviews those proposals. And then I find out who it is at the end of the process. So, yeah.
And is that then sent to city council then to decide the final say?
Yeah,
on
they
that?
end up approving it.
Yes. So, I mean, obviously, us as a city, just like most government organizations, we have procurement rules that have to be normally followed, and so it goes through those process. It will go through a legal review, just as most of those contracts, and all contracts have to for the city. And then it goes through, both an administrative process for administration support, as well as the council process for ultimate funding.
Okay. Thank you for that. And so that now we'll transition into the shelters segment of that. So thank you for giving that description of kind of the system as a whole. Hopefully, we were able to glean out some information on that. But in regards to shelters, as we talk about the shelter system, I mean, just to recap and review what's available currently, there's four gender-specific shelters, right? And then one of those four is abstinent, faith-based type of shelter. Then you have one that takes both, and then you have Family Promise. They take families, and you have adolescent. And so there's just a kind of a variety, but what's the plan, I guess, looking at real-time shelter count system? How can the CHHS or the city foster buy-in and implementation to that real-time shelter count? Because when situations that we're encountering is when there's certain ordinances in play that affect where law enforcement goes and says, hey, there's shelter space available. Well, there's certain specific regulations and philosophical stuff going on. Each shelter has their own different dynamic. So with that real-time shelter count system, what are the plans with that moving forward and having other shelters buy into that communication line?
well, I'll start this and Eric can supplement what I say, but the city's been working on a dashboard that we launched last year to pinpoint what the capacity is on a night-by-night basis amongst all the shelters. And it was a pilot because, unfortunately, not all the providers, not all the shelters, excuse me, have the equipment or the training to be able to provide that data. Excuse me. So we've been working on that, and we're going to make that a public. It's been mostly internal facing as we try to get them up to speed and make sure that the data that we get is continuous. That's been somewhat of a challenge. That dashboard will will land in an independent place that will become public facing, so that anybody has access to a website that they can go to find out what the capacity is night by night with all of the shelters that provide data. When you say real time, though, it's only as good as the data that's implemented. So we still have to come to a place where we have to decide, is that information that's provided every night? Is it several times during the day? Just how real can we get it to? It's not going to be what most people think. If you have software and people with badges and we get to kind of track them as they're going day to day, so it's not going to be that type of real time data, but it's going to be as close to real time as we can get. And that is going to be made publicly by the end of the year.
Okay, and is there then, as that is in the works, is there a plan at all to either increase shelter capacity during the seasonal months? You briefly spoke about, taking the year-round kind of approach to sheltering. Is there anything up and coming that we could utilize during these colder
Well, I think it'd be good, Robert, if you don't mind, if I just talk about the things that we have done in the last year and a half, just under the pandemic and bringing on new shelters into the system, which I think is pretty amazing. So when COVID hit, and we had people at Cannon, which was our seasonal, that's the city-owned shelter near Brown's Addition, and it was the seasonal shelter that we would ramp up when the winter came and then we would close it down in the spring. Well, COVID hit, right before spring, we had people at Cannon and that shelter was getting ready to close down as it typically does. But we knew because of COVID, we didn't want 100 people not having a place to stay during a global health pandemic. So we continued to house 100 people during the first part of 2020. So once they left Cannon and Cannon shut down, we put them in the library. You might remember the downtown library had closed for construction. That was only optional for a couple of months. Then we moved into the Spokane Arena because all of the events had shut down. The arena wasn't being used. We served 100 people in the arena for 90 days. Knowing that that contract was going to end, we started looking for other locations or to bring another shelter on board. That's when the county used CARES Act funding and purchased what was the Spokane Housing Authority building on Mission, and that became an emergency shelter that we used during COVID. So we moved 100 of those individuals into that facility. It was run by the Salvation Army. It closed in June of this year and is, I'm so excited. There's a ribbon cutting on Friday to open that shelter as a bridge housing shelter identified by the COC's plan to end homelessness. And that will be a higher barrier. That shelter is a bridge housing program, and people will be referred there. And it will be a more service intense program where they can be stabilized 30, 60, 90, or even longer, how many days it takes for them to exit homelessness and then go into permanent housing. So that starts probably next week, if all goes according to plan. That will bring on 60 more beds into the system. So when they closed in June, we didn't lose those beds. We replicated those beds throughout the system at Catholic Charities, at Truth Ministries, at Cannon. UGM brought on a dozen beds that were low barrier, Volunteers of America. So we duplicated those 100 beds throughout the system, and now we're adding 60 more beds come next week. Even though those beds are higher barrier beds, what it does is we've already identified numerous individuals in the low barriers who are ready to be referred to bridge housing. And what that does is once they move to bridge housing, it clears up more beds in the low barrier night-by-night emergency system. We also did last winter, which worked very, very well, hoteling. And we'll do that again this year as well. We also did the young adult shelter. So young adult shelter, part of the COC plan to end homelessness, targeting youth, or young adults 18 to 24 years old. Volunteers of America right now is providing 30 temporary beds, 15 at Volunteers of America's Hope House for women, 15 at Transitions for men. And they have purchased, Volunteers of America has purchased the old SCAPCA building on East Mission next to Spokane Community College. That will be the new young adult shelter. We hope to open that next year. Great program, as you know, if you can work upstream to get people who are young, educated, trained, and into permanent housing, you can help prevent the next generation of homelessness. That will open next year. And we have a great program with partnership with SCC to provide continuing education and technical training for young adults. So that's an awesome program that's coming on board. And again, as Eric said, the city's Cannon shelter is now a year-round shelter. It was only operated 6 months out of the year. It's now year-round, and it will provide day space in the summertime for people to get off the street in the heat, take a shower, do laundry, connect to services, charge electronics, or whatever. So we've made a lot of inroads in the last year and a half and during a pandemic, and all of those things align with the COC's plan.
And what does that process like entail? I know there's no magic wand that says, oh, there's a shelter there's a shelter there, but what is that selection process as far as like getting a shelter system? I mean, I know it's like selecting an organization to run it, but like what's the whole picture as far as getting a shelter on the ground?
Well, they have to go through that, so the provider has to go through the RFP process, the competitive bid process. Volunteers of America has done great work in the area with their crosswalk program. By the way, they're moving the crosswalk also. It'll be their new crosswalk 2.0 will be just a block away from the young adult shelter. So they'll really have a campus within a block radius on the north side of Spokane. So that's great. But we, through the RFP competitive bid process, are able to identify the best provider to operate these facilities. But there is a lot that goes into locating a shelter, locating a building. It takes many, many, many months. And a lot of that work involves neighborhood engagement. And Volunteers of America does an excellent job. When they're going to locate a shelter in a neighborhood, they do community and neighborhood engagement. When the Guardians started running Cannon during COVID year-round, and they really stepped up in being a good partner in their neighborhood. We had the Browns Addition Neighborhood Council write us a letter, send it to my office and the council's office and say, Guardians are doing an excellent job. We want you to keep them operating that shelter. They're engaged in the neighborhood. They pick up litter. They even broaden their security around the shelter to include the neighborhood, Coeur d'Alene Park. I mean, it's those kinds of things, but it's a lot of work. I don't know if you want to add anything, Eric, but just citing a location in a building for a young adult shelter took many, many months.
And how do businesses play into this? Like businesses, the shelter system, or the system as a whole, basically. How do the businesses, or like I know you mentioned churches being involved, and how do they play into the system as a whole, but maybe even sheltering as well?
Okay. Well, it's going to take all of us, right, working together, the city, the nonprofits, the private sector, business community, the faith community. I mean, I really see the faith community as, that's what they do, that they're invested in humans. They're invested in people's lives and helping better people's lives. I see at some point when we start getting more transitional housing, like Bridge Housing program up and running, that we can use the faith community to help shepherd these people from, the life that they're leaving into the life that they are entering now. Just like when somebody's new in their sobriety, you can't just release them out into the world that they lived in with all the people that they used to hang around with that aren't clean and sober anymore. It's about relationships, and it's about shepherding people in this new point in their life to make them as successful as possible.
And I guess what I would add, and I think you've heard it from several of the past and current speakers, but it is a joint effort. I think as soon as any one of us feels like we have the solid lock on what is right, and someone else doesn't, then we probably stopped listening. And so I think having kind of the business community there, having the people with lived experience, having the subject matter expertise, having the providers, having the nonprofit organizations, the religious organizations, I think it's all part of the same ecosystem. And so I think the more we can have the same people around the table to jointly solve the problems, and again, like I said, I'm less concerned about the things we argue about because we're applying intelligence to getting to a better point than I am the ones that we don't talk about.
And what do you think are the areas that need to be improved or supplemented at a higher level?
Well, I think as we've talked about, back to the system, the system-wide piece, I think we need to do that better kind of strategic look all the time. And even with the COC board, I think there's been this conversation about, okay, let's relook at our 5-year plan, because this is a living, growing thing, and certainly COVID has taught us a few lessons as well. But I think we have to take almost like a Kaizen approach to this in terms of, we have to incrementally improve. We have to look at all the things that we're doing every year and then look at and say, okay, so can we improve this? Are we finding a weakness here or seeing a challenge here that maybe we didn't anticipate or thought that the tools we were applying were going to get us better outcomes and aren't? And then how do we continue to do that without it necessarily just being I think that angry conversation, because I think this is a complex set of challenges for our community, and there's a lot of interconnectedness, and so I always appreciate the collaborative dialogue, and I have to say this, and this is what I've tried to say to each of the leadership boards that I've talked to, and so if you can humor me for a moment here, because this is it's meant to be a joke, but it's one with a point. And that's the optimist and the pessimist were arguing for days about who was right. Meanwhile, the realist was telling them they were both wrong. And in the background, the pragmatist was doing the work of all four. So I would appreciate all good pragmatism that we can apply to this, because there are, as you all know, good, real problems that we need to address for our community, and we're certainly better together in doing that.
And you mentioned kind of like updating that five-year plan, and who initiates that ongoing like reevaluation process? Does that just fall on the COC alone, or is that supposed to be a collaborative effort? I know the board consists of 20-some individuals, but how is the city engaged in that kind of reevaluation process?
So good question, and I think it needs the collaboration. So when we talk about kind of that joint governance, I think it is trying to bring all those folks together, and to a degree, the COC is meant to be, I think, in that umbrella, right? But at the end of the day, the county does have a different look and at times set of priorities, and it's not that it's good, bad. It just needs to be considered. And so I think kind of making sure that we have the COC board, we have the CHHS board, we have the county's equivalent of their board, and the regional governance that it has those kind of senior electeds on it. Both mayors, Mayor Wick as well as Mayor Woodward, and the county commissioners at the table, right, to help kind of activate, the solutions that are brought, I think is that best combination. So I think it's easy to say, difficult to do, because obviously the more people you have in a room, then the more vibrant conversations you're going to have, but I think it's necessary for our community.
And I was just going to add, from what I understand, and Dale, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the COC does look at that plan yearly and decide whether or not they're going to update it. And the last look was more nuanced, no real changes until you look at it again for next year. So I think we're making good progress on the plan so far, and thus their last look at it, they didn't have any necessarily big recommendations for it. But we still do have a lot to learn from the system, as always. We can always do better. We can learn from other cities, as Dale mentioned. Houston is doing great work in housing people, but we can learn from that. When they provided housing for low income or permanent supportive or whatever that looked like, it wasn't a concentrated model. It was scattered throughout the city in 4 to 6 units at a time, so that neighborhoods can come and help support people who are now, moving into housing for the first time. As we've seen, when resources and services are concentrated in one area, it tends to have a negative impact on that area. So best practice use now is a more scattered model, and I think that's what a lot of cities are starting to do. The private sector did just recently, you'll probably hear about this, bring in a mayor, a former mayor from a city, to learn how this mayor in Albuquerque was able to end, in his 8-year term, ended chronic homelessness by 80% through housing and some sheltering. So we can always learn, and we're looking at what other cities are doing so that we can improve our own system and outcomes.
And what improvements, just off the top of your head, do you feel like need to be addressed?
Well, I mean, we're on a great path. This mayor that came in about a week and a half ago said, you know, your community is so much further along than I was when I started. And the energy and the passion and the commitment level that this community has, because this former mayor talked to a lot of service providers, stakeholders, and said, you are so much further along in this process. He said, you have a great start. But I think there's always room for improvement. In my budget for 2022, I proposed another new low barrier shelter. I mean, we need more shelter space. I'm just going to tell you honestly, when I came into office, I wasn't supportive of just more low barrier shelters, but you know, now that I've been here and I've learned a lot, and it's far more complex than I ever thought it was. I mean, you guys do this every day, you know, but I came in and I didn't. I've learned a lot. I've listened. We've done a lot of great work. We've opened new shelters. We've brought new programs on, but that doesn't mean the plan stops. I mean, even the COC's plan, there's going to be a 2.0 and a 3.0. It's going to continue to evolve. And sorry, I don't think we're the 5-year plan to end homelessness. Don't think we're ever going to end homelessness, but we have to do a better job of utilizing our system. And you've heard that, excuse me, functional zero. When we're bringing on the bridge housing program and we're referring people to a higher barrier and freeing up space in the lower barriers, that's kind of better utilization of our system. And so I think that's very, very helpful. And I'll just say that, you know, in the last, we've made great inroads in young adults, reducing the homeless population among young adults. Because of our anchor community program that we have, the City of Spokane is the first in the state and the third in the nation to reduce youth and young adult homelessness. The goal to reduce, we should be very, very proud of that. The goal to reduce veteran homelessness from September 2020 to September 2021. The goal was to reduce veteran homelessness by 5%. We reduced it 17.5%, 3 times what the goal was. So we are doing good things. We just need to keep evolving the plan to do even better.
And lastly, we're wrapping up here in a couple minutes, and that was key.
Oh,
for you.
thank you.
Was it for me?
I don't know.
Okay.
Was it for
But yes, so it's key for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, considering, aside from your perspective changing on the shelter system, considering this is a question that was addressed, considering what you knew first coming into office compared to now, what perspectives have changed aside from, you mentioned your change in view of the shelter. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to that change?
It was just that, like I said, it's so complex. We can't say that this is the reason we have chronic homelessness or this is. Every individual has their own path out of homelessness. So as many individuals there are who do not have a home, there are that many paths to exit homelessness. And we have to be conscious of that, and we have to be flexible, and we have to be able to respond to that. So the complexity of it, and then again, saying that I still firmly believe the city can't do this on its own. It's a regional effort. It's going to take our regional partners. It's going to take all of you on the front lines of this work. It's going to take our nonprofits. It's going to take our business community. It's going to take the private sector. It's going to take the faith community. It's got to be, but we all really need to make a conscientious effort to work together. We may not always agree on things, but I think we can find more common ground when we have conversations and listen and lean in on that common ground to get the work done.
Go ahead, Eric. No. Oh, so just want to, so we are at time right now, and I want to thank everyone for sending in your questions that you had. We sent out an email for about a week long. left it open for questions. So these are all based on kind of a theme that was developed on what was sent in. So I just want to leave room for closing comments from Eric and closing comments from Mayor Woodard.
So thank you, and I guess what I would like to do is extend the thank you to you, because I think that this shows a level of care and concern, like I said, that has been unique in my experience. When you know,